because we'll be talking about the economy a little bit. We all know that the headline today is the economy. Everything else is taking a back seat to the stimulus package or the creation of jobs. Every time I turn on CNN, that's all that I see. What's going on with the economy? And here at DCC, we have a group of folks that are working on putting together a conference. It's called Living in the New Economy. That's going to be happening later this month, April 25th. And it got me reflecting on how we ended up where we are today. Last week I stumbled upon an article by Jim Burklow. He's on the board of the Center for Progressive Christianity. And he laid it out pretty straightforward, I think. So I wanted to read you what he wrote. He says, well, it all started with onions. In the good old days, Rachel the farmer sold a bag of onions to Harry the hay baler for a bale of hay. A year later, Rachel sold Harry the onions for a silver dollar. Then she began to sell the onions to Harry for a dollar bill, a piece of paper, which the government declared was good for a dollar's worth of silver. But soon after that, Rachel realized that she could sell the onions to Harry for a check. A different kind of paper that the bank said was worth the paper that the government said was good for a dollar's worth of silver. Right? But as we all know, paper can be so burdensome. So Harry began to conduct the transaction with a plastic card, where the bank bought the onions for Harry with his promise that he would pay it back. And then the digital age dawned, and Harry was online filling out blanks on his screen. Rachel got a direct deposit in her bank account, and the onions were FedExed. The process of buying onions had become so simple, and money was abundant. Before you knew it, Harry had become an onion speculator and began to dabble in the onion futures market. It was very, very lucrative. So then Rachel sold Harry her barn to use as a tax shelter. But of course, Rachel rented the barn back from Harry, and he paid her to store her onions. Rachel eventually stopped raising onions altogether and became a property manager instead. And Harry, being a smart guy, decided to create a derivative financial product to mitigate the risk of possible lower rental income in the future, which he then sold to Rachel. Rachel in turn formed an insurance company and sold Harry a policy against possible loss of value in that derivative, backing the policy with their onion storage rental income. And Harry borrowed against this policy to buy more onions, which he paid to Rachel to store in the barn. And the government, not overly concerned with all of this, celebrated the virtues of the free market. You with me? Now Harry, through all this, had built an enormous storehouse of onions. It was such a stockpile, in fact, that they eventually began to rot. And Rachel demanded a renegotiation of the rent on the barn. And since the onions were now rotten, their value evaporated, and Harry had bet on the price increases, so he faced financial ruin. The rent went down, and Harry tried to collect on his insurance policy, but all that Rachel would give him as a payout was a bag of rotten onions. So Harry stopped paying Rachel to store the onions, and she went broke. and eventually stopped paying Harry rent altogether. And Harry's mortgage was bigger than that whole smelly barn was worth. So he stopped making payments on the barn. The bank that held the mortgage went bust, and Harry lost his line of credit. And in the end, Harry and Rachel walked to the barn door, stood there looking in, and all that they had left between them were bags of rotting onions. And that's how we got in the mess we are today. It's pretty simple, isn't it? It's really confusing how we ended up with the state of the economy now. The reality is that the effects of the economy are being felt every day in very real ways, here in our own congregation. We have teachers that are receiving pink slips. Folks that have been at their jobs for 20 or 30 years are now being asked to leave. Retirement savings, 401ks are evaporating. People are losing their homes. In fact, at the shelter this past year, I just went back and checked the numbers. 23% of the people that stayed at the shelter this year had either lost their home or their apartment. That's a high number. And those of us that still have our jobs are probably wondering if we might be next. We are moving about in society like pawns of an ailing financial empire. Pawns. What happens when everything you believe in and live by is smashed to pieces by circumstances? This is a question that Eugene Peterson asks in his introduction to the book of Jeremiah. And I think it's a good question for us today because Jeremiah lived in a time that in many ways mirrors our experience today. He wrote during one of the most traumatic periods of Israel's history, a time when the people were dominated by foreign powers, and when they experienced financial ruin and oppression and even exile. They were in every way a pawn in the hands of a larger empire. Now, when catastrophes occur, like that of Judah or our economy today, it provides us with a unique opportunity to reflect on how we experience and understand our God. When society is flourishing, it's natural for us to relate to God